Hello. Hi, I'm Justin Lam, and welcome to our webinar, From Data Security Readiness to ROI. I'm Justin Lam, Senior Research Analyst with 451 Research, an S&P Global Market Intelligence company. And in today's session, we're looking forward to discussing data security, how to achieve operational readiness, how to realize the investment from it. And before I get started into introductions on who our panelists are, I wanted to have a couple of housekeeping notes for everyone. One is to use the Q&A widget if you can. If there are comments that you'd like to have or questions that you'd like to have, by all means, ask them. I'm not sure today if we will have time to answer Q&A, but we'll certainly be able to get to your questions one way or another. Also, the presentations, the slide, the other resources are available in the related content section here. And last but not least, your opinion matters. For us to make these sessions more productive for you, your surveys, they really, really help us out. So at the end, if you could just take a moment to complete the survey and share with us your opinion on the session, that's really great. So moving on here just a little bit, I want to introduce the three of us on today's session here. I'm Justin Lam. I am Research Analyst with S&P Global Market Intelligence, 451 Research. And I wanted to introduce my two other colleagues here. First, I'll start with you, Karthik, if you could introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Justin. Karthik Krishnan. I am the founder and CEO of Concentric AI. We are an AI-powered data security governance company that helps enterprises discover, monitor, and protect their most sensitive business-critical data.
Awesome. And Jason?
Yeah, hey, everyone. I'm Jason Frame. I'm the Chief Information Officer down at Southern Nevada Health District. We're the local public health agency, and we're also a primary care provider down in the Las Vegas area. If you don't know what public health is, we're the ones who do all the restaurant inspections to make sure that all the tourists are safe when they come to the great conferences we have in Vegas. We do a lot of other things alongside of that. And then if you all remember back a few years ago to something small that we had happen called COVID, that was all of us. We did everything with COVID, from the testing, the contact tracing, the vaccinations, and all of that. So that's kind of what we do.
Wow. That's interesting. Given that we are going to be talking about readiness and whatnot. Wow, what a trial by fire that must have been.
It was a crazy time, and I'm glad it's over.
For sure. Well, thank you for that. Well, let's just jump right into it here. We talk a little bit about data security, but one of the books that's sort of been really helpful for me is the habits of 7 habits of highly effective people, and it begins by thinking about the end goal in mind. And so thinking about data security and success, maybe we'll start with you, Jason. What does data security success mean? If you could just take some time to describe, what that means for you, thinking about, how should people at the end of the session be thinking about success? If you could just share some of your experiences there and definitions.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think about data security success, they really think about, not having a breach. But I think those days are over. Everyone you talk to the FBI, you talk to anyone in cybersecurity, we all know that it's a when, not an if, we're going to get breached. So for me, data security is being ready for that, being ready for, really not just a breach, but for anything that we need. Part of what we do here is we have a whole readiness group, and we practice it, like what we did for the pandemic. We also do a lot of that internally in IT, is to be ready for whatever might be coming. So one, we have data security to make sure that we protect our data, because being in healthcare, we have a lot of sensitive data. One of our most sensitive areas of data is our HIV patient population. We do all that data surveillance on there, and that's the data that we have to make sure that we secure at the highest levels. So just, preparing for what if someone gets in, but also what if someone actually sends something out to the wrong person? We have those internal things. So we do a lot of training on that, but we also try to put in a lot of controls, and that's where data security comes in. And then a new area where data security has become really more important for us in the last few months is we're getting a lot of demand to use AI and use things like Copilot. We haven't been able to turn it on for everyone yet, because we know that our data is not perfectly tagged. We don't know where all our data is. And so we've started that process to clean that up, because we want to enable our users to use the most current tools and become more productive, we have to make sure that we're ensuring our public's safety, their privacy, and then we're also making sure that we secure that data so patient information doesn't get out there. We don't get a breach. We don't have that loss of reputation or anything like that.
Wow, that's a great introduction, and that's really helpful to understand. Maybe it's another question for you, Jason and Karthik here, but as you're organizing the teams, though, what are some of the sort of internal barriers to be mindful of in terms of making sure? I mean, it's one thing to say yes, we you drill and you exercise against these various contingencies that happen, but can you offer any tips on or suggestions on removing barriers, just driving more of that organizational alignment, maybe being able to get user buy-in for either you, Karthik, or Jason, on what you've seen? How are you driving that success across the organizations?
I'll start with that one because we've done a pretty good job on that. When we're teaching about why we need to have data security, why we need to protect privacy, we've really broken it down in the education part to the language that our customers are speaking. So we have a number of different groups of users in our areas. We have some that are very scientific. We have our nurses that are great at taking care of patients. We have our analysts. We have our data scientists. And so when we're talking to all of them, we talk to them in different ways. So like with our nurses, we talk to them about data security in the same way we mention it as, when you took the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm to your patients. Well, that also includes their data. And so kind of bringing it in that fashion, I had a couple of nurses stop by and tell me that they'd never thought of it that way. And they never understood how it was until we put it into their language. So I think it's, going into their language and then really showing that we're trying to enable them rather than hinder them. It kind of reminds me about, when you think about the automobiles and the cars in the past, they didn't have very many safety features, so they were limited in their speed. Now you look at, say, Formula One, you look at all the safety features they have, the great brakes that they have, the great teams behind them, and how fast they can go. So I think the barriers, they don't really decrease your speed, they can actually increase speed with the right barriers. So we use that as a model when we look through it and said, how can we increase our productivity? How can we increase this? By putting these barriers in, so that someone, when they're moving forward at full speed, doesn't accidentally breach data security. So it kind of goes back to that education, that personalization, and then also putting in those safety guardrails in place.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Jason, for that feedback. I mean, that's really a great analogy. How about you, Karthik? I mean, you've been, this is not Concentric, and just it's not your first adventure in being an entrepreneur. You've designed security systems for generations now. What are you seeing in terms of what's been your experience in designing and making security available for all the different kinds of stakeholders that Jason describes?
Yeah, I think that was a perfect analogy, Jason. I remember, one of my mentors a long time ago said, hey, brakes are not there to slow down a car. They're actually there to make the car go faster. So that was just a spot on analogy. Really, I think, if you look at everything you're doing in security, the whole point is, what are you trying to do, right? I think eventually you want to make sure that your end users are productive, they are collaborating, they're able to get the efficiency gains that they can. And yet you've got the guardrails around whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? To make sure that you're protecting it. Now, you have to do this in a cost-effective manner. And if I translate it back to data security, and one of the reasons we started Concentric AI, the challenge, especially from data, was operationalizing data security for most customers is a tremendous challenge. It's not just a technology problem, it's also a people and a process problem. I remember early on when I started the company, one CISO told me, he was spending $5 on people for every dollar in solution costs in data security just to operationalize, and yet years later get underwhelming results. And so the question really is, hey, how can you help customers achieve their business outcomes, which is, eventually protecting your data, making sure that if you look at the spectrum of things that can cause a data leakage, it comes from a careless employee, which is often 70-80% of what an enterprise has to deal with. And then you've got the compromised users, and you've got the insiders themselves. How can you protect your data and make sure that eventually the people who shouldn't have access to certain critical data sets, that could be financial data, that could be intellectual property, that could be PII, PCI, PHI data, how do you make sure that the wrong people don't get access to it? But you also have to be able to tangibly demonstrate the ROI. For example, we've seen situations for some of our customers where, we've helped, in their cases, clean up 100 million records for, less than a cent a record. And if you map that against the cost of what they would have to deal with in a post-breach scenario, where, those costs can be like anywhere from like, $75, $100, $150. Now, you have meaningfully translated what is a security outcome into an ROI outcome where you can convince, you can talk to the customer about how you have effectively helped them operationalize security for a fraction of what it would cost in a sort of a reactive scenario.
That's really helpful to understand, and thank you for that, Karthik. I think one of the big trends, I'm just wrapping my brain around this idea of the driving and the automobile safety kinds of things, because we're always driving cars, and we're not always. We know we're driving safely, but we know that we're not necessarily, and we know we're probably operating safely with many of the controls that we have, but there's still this requirement, I think, that's changing, just given the nature of how dynamic things are, to always be able to check readily and quickly. I would just say that, in my experience in the industry and just what we're seeing here at 451 Research S&P Global, is that you may have periodic compliance checks that are sort of a point in time. Hey, on January 3rd, we had all these documented controls and artifacts attesting to our data security stature. And the thing is that organizations change, technologies change, and so you have all these, these changes that are underlying, or scenarios change. Gen AI is going to change a lot of things. And so I guess, how do you deal with the pushback when you always seem to have this need to check what my data security stature is versus, hey, the organization is in flight. Do I really need to stop and see, what my current status is? And just wondering, if you, Jason, can talk about a little bit about balancing that, idea of, yes, I need to consistently check my systems and my safety and my security, but also on the other hand, I need to get to my destination, right? We still need to serve the people. We still got to make sure we're doing it in a safe way. Maybe you could speak a little bit about some of those challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with what you're saying. A lot of times you do the security stuff, you do your evaluations, your compliance checks, and you're checking a box. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure, okay, yeah, we have that because either it's required by some group, or I need it for insurance or something like that. And a lot of people just then forget it until the next year.
Right.
But in the reality, like you were saying, things change so often that you constantly have to be monitoring it and keeping up on it. But that does become difficult when you have a small team or a lean team. We're right in that mid-sized space, and we don't have any full-time security people. So this is a part of a few people's jobs. So what we need to do is look for tools and partners that help us to make this a lot easier, because it's not something that we can just say, hey, we're going to do this right now and maybe revisit it in a year, because things change so fast. We need those tools that'll help us and monitor it. And that's where I think AI is really starting to help and change things, is you can do a lot of that constant monitoring now. And you kind of look back, 25, 30 years ago, when just on the application development front, everything was waterfall. And now we then moved into Agile. Now we're into CI and CD, continuous development, continuous integration. I think that's where security is heading now. It's a continuous monitoring. It's not just, hey, monitor it at one time, check the box, and then come and revisit it. It's let's make sure that we're putting in these safeguards and we're monitoring it at all times. So we have this real-time system. When it catches something new that was either misplaced or miscategorized, it can be able to send a warning or an alert, or really the best case is automatically update those tags or help with those locations. So I think that's where we're heading. I don't think we're there yet, but I think AI is really helping get there a lot faster.
Oh, interesting. Karthik, I know it looks like you wanted to say something here about being about that continuous monitoring and just making that easier. If you could share some of your experiences there and what your thinking is on that.
Yeah, data. I live and eat, breathe, sleep the world of data security, and this is one of the most dynamic environments, right? Data volumes are growing. Data is everywhere for most enterprises, on premises, in the cloud. The nature of what is sensitive for most customers also has become infinitely more complex. Everything from financial data to PII, PCI, PHI data to intellectual property data. And most security teams are often struggling even to answer basic questions like where is my sensitive data, much less what the risk is against the data. All the while, your end users are creating, modifying, duplicating, sharing content all over the place. And so there's just the risk environment is not something that can be a one-time activity. I mean, it's got to be exactly like Jason said. It has got to be continuous monitoring, but also more importantly, you cannot end up in a situation where you're just throwing, a volume of, 1,000 alerts at your security teams, where in order to find the one incident that's meaningful, they have to go wade through 999 other alerts that may all be like false positives. And so how do you enable and provide meaningful insights into where there is true risk against the data that the security teams care about, that they have to then go in and investigate and take action against, and how do you not end up wasting people's time? And I think that's where certainly I would say AI and particularly generative AI has a very meaningful role to play in helping customers, corral through this rather complex environment, understand where all of their sensitive data is, understand where there's risk against that data, from everything from permissioning, entitlement, sharing, activity, to also then being able to provide meaningful risk insights that customers can take action on without, like Jason said, large teams. I think the days of people. Of customers being able to throw large teams at these problems are just long gone. I think people want actionable insights. People don't want their time wasted, and people want to see meaningful progress in terms of how you can reduce risk, and for that to be a continuous monitoring mechanism. So it's not just a one-time activity.
Well, that's really great. I mean, I would just say that one of the things that we're seeing here at S&P Global is there's two sides of the coin here. One is security, is AI for security, and to your point, Jason and Karthik, making that security operational more efficient, right? I think that's one aspect of it. The alert fatigue, it's very real. Some of our data at 451 shows that nearly half, if not more, of all alerts that are generated by a system just simply aren't responded to at all by anyone. And so and clearly, Jason, you described it, so well. The reality is that your team is really small and it's really focused. You don't have the luxury of being able to staff out and navigate through all of those alerts manually or trying to contextualize them.
Right.
I think on the other side of the coin, though, is something that you brought up earlier, Jason, is Gen AI, securing Gen AI usage itself. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's sort of on everyone's mind, when, everyone's been playing with ChatGPT or some Copilot or something along the lines. And the question really is that, behind all this intelligence, there's this sort of uncanny valley, if you will, or uncanny experience of like, well, what's that, what is all this data going to? Is some of my data that I'm entering in through some of these chats or some of these prompts, is it actually sensitive? Am I uploading some of this data? And so one of the things I wanted to share here on the screen here is our first particular slide, are the influential factors from our research data showing what are some of the factors in choosing a large language model in general. And this is from a recent study that we've done on privacy operations in generative AI, where we studied a whole bunch of enterprises. And, no surprise, privacy and security were the number one influential factors in choosing a large language model. And the astounding number of language models that are out there, and the systems and that whole ecosystem, the way it is moving so quickly. If I look at things like Hugging Face, for example, Hugging Face today has 1.5 million language models to pick and choose from. The number of SaaS platforms, whether that's a collaboration thing, whether it is technology from Microsoft Copilot, Anthropic, Claude, you name it, there is so much to mix and match from companies that now the question is along the lines of readiness is I've got to consider the privacy and the security thereof. So. Right. I guess switching here to you a little bit, Jason and Karthik, when you're thinking about, Copilot rollouts or Gen AI for the masses, what's that readiness look like for to enabling this particular kind of use case? Maybe I'll start with you again, Jason. Yeah.
I think you really hit it. I mean, Gen AI, it's a game changer. And it's going to change the game, either positive or negative for your organization. It depends on how ready and prepared you are. Looking at your slide about, privacy and security, I think when Gen AI first hit a couple of years ago, that was way lower on the list until we started hearing some of the public issues with people putting in stuff and you've seen those breaches happen or that private information getting shared. That's really raised the level, and I'm glad to see that as the number one thing right now. But it's going to change the game. Anytime you're dealing with AI, the key to Gen AI is having good data. And making sure that you give it access to the data that you want it to, but not give it access to the data that you don't want it to. Because once it's out there, and if you've not properly configured it, and you let it free on your whole organization and your whole environment, you might lose some IP, you might lose some protected health information or PII. So it's making sure that the readiness part of that is understanding where your data is, where it lives, what data can be exposed, what can't. Going back to the tagging part. And this is really easy when you look at structured data. Stuff that's in your databases and your applications, what that data is. It's that unstructured data that the people are out there, creating. I think Gen AI is part of the solution, but it's also part of the problem. It's kind of that double-edged sword because a lot of this data now is being generated by Gen AI. And if people aren't doing it right, they have bad data. Now you're getting your hallucinations, you're getting improper answers, and people are not taking that as facts. That's another problem of one of the reasons why we need to make sure that our data is clean. Right. But another thing to think about is, whatever tool you use, whatever LLM you use, you just want to make sure that you understand what data you're feeding it because you don't want to put in the wrong stuff. And so being ready for that, and that means understanding these models, understanding what they're doing, understanding the DLP that goes with that. And I think that's one of the biggest issues now, and I think the next area that needs to be looked at when it comes to data security is that data loss prevention of not letting people paste stuff into these LLMs or not people letting upload documents or whatever. I think that's kind of the next step of where we're headed. But, just awareness of how your data is used, awareness of where it's stored, understanding that someone just, created a file with a bunch of PII in it, and we got to make sure that is tagged properly so it doesn't become part of our model.
Right. Karthik, can you maybe speak a little bit on, with Gen AI, the one thing I would just say that about these systems is that they're not, the biggest risk I see is that, especially from a compliance or a sort of a risk management perspective, is that it's not deterministic. By definition, these tools are predictive, right? They will take your inputs, but you really, don't know exactly what you're going to get. And to your point, Jason, is that a hallucination? What is actually the effect of it? The ability to repudiate from a model is another thing. Once I've entered something in, how do I take it back out? Just Karthik, from your perspective here, just seeing, what are you seeing in the industry about, and just among your customers and your experience on, how AI is, and the AI usage is going to change the rules of data security?
Yeah. So, what is the biggest fear that my customers have, right? What they're worried about and what they're terrified of is a junior employee querying a Gen AI model that they've deployed and saying, "Hey, how is our revenue this quarter?" Or, "Give me the patient records of this particular patient." And for some reason, the model is basically going to essentially aggregate information across your entire environment, and it's going to present it back to users completely agnostic to whether it's sensitive, not sensitive, whether it's important to you, not important to you, whether that user needs access to this information or not. And so the biggest worry that my customers have is, and today, if you wanted to go access that information, maybe you have to really like troll through all of your data and figure it out. But now, it's literally a cursor click away or a prompt click away from any user within your company having access to information that could be super sensitive. And so that's a nightmare, right? In fact, we had a financial services company, the CEO mandated that they had to roll out Copilot to support the research needs of their financial traders. The CISO said, "Look, this is fine, but I don't have my data classified. I don't have the appropriate permission structure placed in location." And so without that, these models are just going to access every document, every record within my environment as if it is suitable for public consumption, and that's just simply not a non-starter. And so, data security governance and making sure that you've got something that can allow for effective permissions monitoring, permissions management, classification management, making sure that you've got the appropriate set of controls around your data almost becomes an essential first step to any meaningful and secure Copilot rollout. In fact, the converse of that is, we had another hedge fund that has been a customer of ours for 3 years. Their CEO came and said, "Hey, we'd like to do Copilot," and they said, "Yeah, no problem. We've got 95% of our data appropriately, classified, permissions managed, and so yeah, we're ready for this kind of a rollout." And so, so that is the biggest challenge. Your dimension, the complexity of making sure that sensitive data is only accessible by the right sets of people becomes an essential first step. Otherwise, you're just looking at like what some people were saying, like there's just data spillage, all over the place.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I mean, with the different sets of risks, I think one of the things that, and Jason, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, when you talked about being able to speak the language of your other stakeholders, right? The example that you gave with, speaking the language of the nurses who understood, patient care and, things like the Hippocratic Oath. I mean, that's really, really powerful, because sometimes on the security side of things, we think a lot about the risk. We sometimes forget about the reward. And one of the things that I wanted to share here in this next particular slide here, this was a study that we've done asking people, talking about, what are your priorities for improving data privacy and for privacy ops practices in light of Gen AI. And it's really interesting. Yeah, today, the majority of them in ranked choice voting, they say, yeah, we have to strengthen the regulatory and the compliance standing. But it's interesting that sort of inverses itself. And when you're looking 2 years ahead of time, we want to advance the opportunities in leveraging AI and Gen AI to be able to either operate privacy operations more efficiently or to enable new technologies within the broader organization to adopt Gen AI. I think that's something that is really, really telling, in that privacy ops, security, governance, all these things, people are thinking of them as business enablers. And certainly, given the speeds of the investments in Gen AI, the breathtaking amount of change, I think, to be saddled with any particular solution that has a high opportunity cost, I think that's kind of a recipe for disaster, given the fact that how quickly things are changing. And so I think anything that can be done to onboard or offboard different Gen AI related technologies that can do nothing but be more agile and be more beneficial for the organization. But again, going back to Jason and Karthik, what are your experiences with that so far? How's that being received within your organizations, the ones that you're seeing? Jason, again, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think if you looked at our users, they'd really mimic these numbers. I think if you pulled a group of security leaders, I think the bottom one would be a lot lower. They would rather go slow and maintain it, but that's not the reality in business anymore. We're moving at the speed of light right now when it comes to AI, and the AI hype cycle is so strong that everyone hears about it. You turn on any news program, you turn on anything, read anything on the web, it's all about AI. And if you go to any conferences, they're all about AI. And so we were at HIMSS this past spring, and we took a bunch of our clinical staff with us because it was here in Vegas. And the first thing they did when they saw me in the hallway was like, "We want more AI." That was the first thing they said to me. And this is a great conference. "We want more AI." And because they're seeing all of what it can do. So I think those numbers might actually be a little bit low if you looked at our organization on that bottom one. So they want it, but and I've had to explain, well, here's why we're taking our time on it, but we are going to enable it. And we've enabled AI use for some aspects, but when it comes to our clinical staff or our informatics team, we're not allowing them to use it yet just because we don't have all those safeguards in play. So definitely I do see this. Our staff understands the regulatory issues and the privacy issues, but they also say, well, you guys figure that out because we want to be able to use this, and we want to, improve what we're doing to help our patients, improve what we're doing to help our constituents. And that's their main goal. So I think being a leader now in the security realm and in the organization, my balance has to be more on that user side. And then I focus with my team on the other parts. So we have to be able to give them the tools that they need with as little friction as possible, but make sure we set those guardrails in place. So it's a tough burden on a team because we're doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes to make sure that people can use these things without hindering their access to it, without slowing them down to the point where then they'll start getting upset and then causing other problems.
Sure. Karthik, any insights from your side, what you're seeing here on that idea of you mentioned the hedge fund CEO coming to you saying, yeah, we want this, but any more insights into making sure that there's alignment in what you're seeing among the customers, among the risk and the reward from Gen AI rollout?
Yeah, I mean, historically, if you look, right, service capabilities, efficiencies, productivity gains will always trump things like risk and security. That's not just now, right? You can go back, you can look at the advent of the internet, you can look at the advent of the cloud. These trends around productivity gains and service capability offerings are always going to trump that. And if you look at AI, it's especially generative AI and sort of the instantiation that we have now. It has the potential to offer just fundamental leaps in terms of those capabilities and efficiency gains and productivity gains. And so, I don't think it's a matter of if, it's just a matter of it's going to happen. And there's just a huge magnetic pull towards that. And I think security teams have to really adjust to the new reality. And either they have to, at least my customers are all bracing for this world. In fact, I was at an event about a month ago, and the CISO was telling me, hey, compared to prior generations of platform transitions and technology transitions, this time it just feels like security is almost lockstep with what's happening on the AI rollout side, a lot faster. Like, for example, if you looked at the cloud adoption happened, and then security happened, 18, 24 months later as sort of a drag along. Whereas this time, AI almost is... it's almost a bit of a black box, and so people are so afraid of what's going to happen that security is almost a co-participant in this rollout. And most customers are just adjusting to the fact that it's just a matter of it is going to happen, and they have to make sure they are essentially evolving, adapting, and having their enterprises ready for this new reality.
Awesome. You both have mentioned something that we see in our research, and that's just, I want to just jump ahead to this next slide that I have here. the measures taken. And I want to call in to highlight here, this idea of employee training. To me, Jason, this I think just hits the nail on the head on what you're describing. The employee training, that employee awareness, that rollout. I mean, at the end of the day, the machines aren't completely taking over, right? You still have, these so-called humans in the loop. Your users are now just becoming power users with the new technology, right? And I think that the way to look at it is through that partnership. To realize the rewards from Gen AI is going to take this partnership. And, from our study data here about what are the measures to protect sensitive data, not surprisingly, sensitive data discovery, data encryption, yeah, those controls, you absolutely want to have great classification, great labeling, great restrictions on what I'm going to be able to prompt or input into a model. But at the end of the day, there's still this need to get the other stakeholders involved and to enable them to achieve what they need to achieve. And this partnership has to exist. Right? I don't think it, based on what you've both have described, it can't really succeed. It's one thing, and I think that also speaks more broadly to readiness itself. We can't all be leaving in the car and thinking we're all safe if only one of us is buckled in, right? If only one of the brakes on the wheel works, well, there's there's 3 other wheels I got to go consider. I mean, there's all sort of the analogy back to the cars. I think that's really the case where you have to have everyone on board on that same page. And I really like what you're saying about tying together the risk and the reward, considering all those other stakeholders and speaking their language in a way that makes sense and ultimately can get us to the destination that we want to go at. So that's really helpful here. So, kind of getting...
I just want to add something here.
Yeah, go for it.
To me, if I look at this chart, the most least effective thing that people are pointing out, the most highlighted one is employee training and policies.
Right.
To me, that's going to be the least effective
Right.
in doing anything. I mean, historically, if you look at data, data has always presented a challenge for security teams because they often have the least amount of context around the data itself. The business units understand the data, and then end users are the ones who are actually handling the data. And they're often stuck between a rock and a hard place in that they have the least amount of context, yet they're responsible for the security and controls around the data. Traditionally, even now, there are Fortune 10 banks using end users to do data classification and so on. It's such an error-prone exercise because end users have really no incentive to secure the data or even ensure that only the right sets of people are looking at it. I mean, all they want to do is they want to get on with their job. They want to be able to do what they can. And so really the fundamental thing here is how do you empower security teams to have the most context around the data, right? Starting with even just basic contextual understanding of where all of their sensitive data is, who has access to it, where's the risk against it. So they can then take the effective downstream measures around, do I classify it? Do I put, the appropriate RBAC around my sensitive data? Do I encrypt the data? What do I do? Do I fence it? So really the opportunity here is for security teams to essentially be able to leverage Gen AI on the other side from a security standpoint to essentially be able to then understand their data and then protect it. So they're not just relying on their end users to do the right thing because that just never works.
Right. Absolutely. I think that this idea of the security teams knowing the other side of the table, so to speak, as much as the other side of the table, knowing how security teams and risk teams, I mean, there's definitely this partnership here. Sometimes it feels like we're describing 2 separate sides, but it's the same coin, so to speak here. So, we talked a little bit about, readiness, the dynamic risk and reward of Gen AI, talked a little bit about, we began our session here with talking about what that success looks like. Now, in light of sort of the new challenges and kind of going forward here, how does your idea or your way of thinking about return on investment, data security success, how does that change, and how do you anticipate that changing, in the seasons ahead? And Jason, I'll start with you.
Yep. I know ROI sometimes is a tough thing to measure when you're looking at new projects, especially with this kind of thing. But for me, it's about increasing that efficiency. Eliminating, like as Karthik was talking about earlier, some of the older technologies or something that cost a lot more. So you're saving money rather. It still might be hard to measure your return, but you're looking for those efficiencies. You're looking for those cost savings. But then you also, and the harder part to measure is the enablement of services. How many more services are we enabling? And, if it's something that maybe doesn't drive profit. I mean, if you're in a sales organization, you enable Gen AI and you can see an increase in sales right away, it's easy to calculate an ROI on that. But in something like we do with public service, ROIs are tough to calculate. So for us, it's about how many more services can we enable? How much more efficient are our people? Are they able to do more things? And then also, another part of that ROI is the accountability and ensuring that we have that partnership with these groups, that they have that freedom to continue to innovate, but also have those safeguards in place. So we build that trust, and part of that is through transparency, being open with them. I know Karthik was talking about how the least effective thing on that chart is the employee training, but I think it's also one of the most important, because if you don't train your people right, and you're not transparent with them, they're not going to have that trust, and you're going to become a hindrance to them now. And people, they try to get by blockades. They just go and they'll do their own thing. And then what you'll start to see is a lot of shadow IT or shadow AI.
Right.
And that's even scarier than opening up AI to let them use it, because you don't know what's being accessed.
Oh,
so I think having that transparency, building that trust is a part of that ROI conversation, and understanding that we're all on the same team here. Let us help you to do better and do more.
Awesome. And Karthik, from your perspective, as the founder of Concentric, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs have, a longer term vision than most, just because of the time that it takes to build an organization like Concentric. How are you seeing that ROI, that conversation changing in the seasons ahead?
Yeah, so I think I'll just add to what Jason said, right? Which is we try to calibrate everything we do, the efficacy of what we do on, hey, are we meaningfully helping customers reduce risk? By how much, right? Are we reducing risk by 60%, 70%, 80%? And that's important metric for us, because and how are we doing this? And with what, right? I mean, are we expecting you to have 10 full-time people or 0 full-time staff? And then that's very important, right? So it's really the combination of, can we reduce risk against your data without a lot of effort, right? That's what we aspire to, is try to be the easy button for data security. So can we do that? And can we clean it up, right? Can we clean up the costs? Like, if you take all of the costs of everything that it costs you, like solution cost plus people time and effort, can we reduce the risk at orders of magnitude less than the alternative scenario should you have to deal with the data breach or an incident response of some sort? In fact, I remember, Mr. Cooper and Loan Depot had data breaches, and I think one had 15 million records, the other had 30 million records. I remember one CIO told me, like, literally the first week of that breach, they each spent like about $100 million, and this was in their public filings, right? And so the reactive costs are almost inevitably a whole lot more than what you would have to do if you're being proactive about it, in terms of ensuring good data hygiene, good least privilege data access governance principles in place. And so that's sort of how we measure, which is, can we reduce risk at a fraction of what it's traditionally cost, much like what Jason was saying, hey, can we save a customer money relative to alternative methods that they've been using in the past? And what is the cost, in the effective cost that we're essentially presenting to the customer for a cleanup of their environment, relative to both, costs that they may have incurred in the past, and also, hey, God forbid something were to happen, what those costs might look like. And so, we're fortunate to say that, we're in a world where we're finding that those environments have been so inefficient in the past that bringing in things like AI to help with this have offered technologies at meaningful price points that can help customers operationalize data security at a fraction of cost that they have traditionally been used to, and also, more importantly, accomplish the outcomes that they have always wanted to accomplish. See, the other part of it is, it's not about spending money, right? I've seen many customers tell me, hey, I've deployed DLP tools and data governance tools, and 2-3 years later, I just haven't gotten the value out of it. I'm still scrambling. I'm still sort of struggling to get the outcomes that I want. So the question is, can you help them hit the outcomes at a fraction of the cost that they've been used to? And so that's super important to look at both metrics.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, probably so many other things that I am looking at as an industry researcher. I mean, we talk quite a bit about some of the harms of just the loss of confidential data. But on our research agenda, the things that we're also thinking about are the harms from the integrity attacks on data. And I know that Gen AI, with its capacity for deep fakes, hallucinations, it's one thing, Jason, for someone to offer, to release patient data or citizen data or stakeholder data inadvertently. It's another thing to offer a service that was Gen AI generated, but actually may do incredible amounts of harm, issuing the wrong care or unprescribed care, for example. You really get some of these dystopian ideas. And the other thing I'll just say is that from our research, the consumer expectations for privacy, trust, transparency, safety, those are all increasingly parts of the brand. And I'm sure we could talk a whole bunch more about it. But this has been a really great start to conversations about data security, the successes that we have, some of the challenges that we've had. I've really liked a lot of what you said, Jason, about bringing together the different stakeholders, speaking that particular language. I think that's really powerful. Karthik, I think it's really powerful that, more so than ever in today's dynamic environments, ounces of prevention are worth pounds of cure. I think that's not lost on anybody, especially in light of how quickly things can change. I think those are really, really powerful takeaways. But we've come to the end of our session here together. I do want to invite all of our folks who have joined us. Thank you on behalf of Jason and Karthik. We love to have more extended conversations. Concentric will be exhibiting at the RSA conference, so please scan the QR code. And if you have any other questions, like I said at the beginning of the call, feel free to contact us. And as we conclude today's session, please fill out the survey as part of this experience and tell us how we did. Tell us what we can do better. But Jason and Karthik, I'll leave it up to you. Any parting words of advice or things that you'd encourage those who are joining us in the session to take away with.
Yeah, I think if you're in the security space, you're a security leader. The first thing to do, don't even wait. Just get a baseline understanding. If you don't have a baseline understanding of your data, where it lives, where it resides, what's where, what is unprotected, all that, find that out. Putting the head in the sand just is not going to work in this case because we're basically holding people back. So get that baseline understanding now. How do you do that? You use partnerships. I could say, reach out to Concentric AI, do a POC with them. Be prepared to be scared when you see the results because we did that and we were kind of shocked with some of the results that we saw. But I would say just get in there and start doing it now because we're already behind the curve, but we want to get caught back up.
Awesome. And how about you, Karthik? What other parting words of wisdom, anything that's sort of a takeaway for others?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Justin, for shepherding this conversation. And thank you, Jason, for your valuable insights. So my thoughts are, hey, operationalizing data security doesn't have to be hard. I think technologies and processes have come a long way. And if you're interested, if you're unhappy with your data security program, and it's a priority to you, and you're worried of the risk of data breach or data loss, come talk to us. Would love to learn about your needs and see if we can be of help. We're going to be at RSA if you want to come by our booth. But otherwise, our Concentric.ai is our website. If you want to reach out to us, we'd be happy to listen, learn, and see if we can be of help.
Awesome. Well, Jason, Karthik, really appreciate the conversation. Super grateful to have you and sparing the time for this and sharing your insights. And so with that, I'd like to adjourn our session today. And again, we look forward to hearing from you soon in future conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day now.